You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
The Centresteer Podcast, a Land Rover podcast by Land Rover owners. Welcome to the Centresteer Podcast, the only Land Rover podcast on the planet. This is show number 57 for December 2017. This is a podcast by, for, and about Land Rover owners. Visit our website, centresteer.com, to listen to previous shows and for show notes, which have links to stories discussed in today's show. We are part of the 4x4 Radio Network, and I invite you to check out the other 4x4 related shows on 4x4radionetwork.com. I'm your host, John Costage. Joining me via Skype is Harold. He's on the road in California, and Morgan is in his Green Mountain state of Vermont. We also have Jeff Aronson of Rovers Magazine and a special guest who calls himself Simon. We'll talk about it later. Thanks for your comments, follows, and likes on Facebook, Twitter, and email. Special thanks to our Patreon subscribers. You want to visit patreon.com/Centresteer for all the details on how to make a monthly contribution. Patreon has reversed its new fee structure, so I don't anticipate that we'll be leaving Patreon at this point. Craig from My Land Rover Has a Soul visited me a few weeks ago. He took photos of my Series 3. So if you're on his mailing list, you would have received a holiday-themed background photo that featured the 109. So if you're not, I think you can get on the mailing list. It was good to meet Craig, and we had a couple beers. And even though he was only here for under 23 hours, it was 24 hours. It was nice to meet and see Craig. So look forward to what he has coming up for My Land Rover Has a Soul. Before we get to
Were you really tracking his time on site that carefully, John?
No, actually, it was less than 24 hours. I didn't track it that
stopwatch when he rolls up and just waiting until he leaves again?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay, all right. Just kind of had that vibe to it when you said that.
He had a whirlwind tour of the East Coast. Let me tell you, he was here for like 3 weeks, and he was just running. And
trying to get the most out of his travel nickel, from what I gather.
He definitely did. Yeah, we came out and visited Harold for a little bit too, so he got to see Harold's shop.
For what that's worth. I got to see your other truck in progress, which is probably cool.
It was, yeah. Before we get to the news, which I anticipate will be a polarizing discussion on the future of Land Rover, I remind you that Alloy and Grit and the Deemer Box have discounts for our listeners through the end of the year. You can get $10 off any subscription to Alloy and Grit. You can get $50 off a Deemer Box. And I'd like to be clear that we didn't receive anything for any of those discounts except a nice discount on a Deemer Box, which I got to use at a friend's party. It turned out very well. It's actually a pretty cool box. And finally, I knew this day would come. I said the only Land Rover podcast on the planet for the last time. I admit to being a little bit sad, but I'm mostly excited because there is now a second Land Rover podcast on the planet, the Green Oval Podcast. It's hosted by Simon Jenner out of Birmingham, England. We'll talk to him later in the show and get the full scoop and rundown on the podcast, where it came from and what he has planned. But for now, a warm welcome to Simon and the Green Oval Podcast.
We are not alone anymore.
In all seriousness, welcome to Simon to the Brotherhood. I don't know. What is this? So the podcast hood of Land Rover Podcasts?
The club? I don't know.
The club? Something. It's something. All right, let's get on to the news. For the month of November in the United States, sales were very good for Land Rover. They were up 20% month to month. That's November of 2016 to November of this year. They sold 1,200 units more than they had in November of 2016. Unfortunately, Jaguar sales were down 9%. They sold, looks like 300 units less than they did last year at this time. Overall, it's a 9% increase, however, between what the two brands put together. And the big sales highlight for Land Rover was the Velar. They sold 1,475 units in November. It is the most popular vehicle among Jag Land Rover for the month of November. Things going very, very well, at least certainly with the Velar. I saw one actually in Pittsburgh. When I went down to Pittsburgh for an event, I saw a bunch of Land Rovers running around, including what I thought was a Velar. It was in passing, but I was like, that's a Velar.
It seems like the smaller models are doing well for them. It was the Evoque that was sort of leading the sales charts, wasn't it?
It was, but seems like the big full-size Range Rovers lately seem to be doing very well. At least that's my take on it.
Well, I don't think, at least here in the U.S., I don't think there's a period where they do poorly. But those new smaller models have definitely taken off. And those sales numbers were U.S. sales numbers, right?
Correct.
Yep. Nice.
Yeah, it's interesting when we talk about the sales and you talk about Jaguar being down or whatever. It just seems like the Land Rover is much more consistent in their sales, whereas the Jag side of the business seems more volatile. It's either a good bit up or a good bit down.
Moving on. Back a month ago, you may recall that we had Brian here before he was headed out to the Land Rover Auto Show, and that happened right after we recorded the last podcast. Coming out of that LA Auto Show was a lot of Land Rover news, and we're going to talk about a number of those things that came out of that show. The first one we'll talk about, Gerry McGovern, of course, is the Chief Design Officer of Land Rover. He had several things. He talked a number of times, and several things that come out of that, including this one. We'll talk about the new Defender later. We're saving that one. I'll give you a little, we will definitely talk about that. But first, good luck to brands trying to overtop Range Rover capability and luxury. Gerry says that we design the vehicle first and then we engineer it. We have very creative engineers who will engage with to make feasible the design, as opposed to engineering something then trying to make the design work around that. So that's not compromising the engineering to have that. They're not compromising engineering to have that approach.
As long as they sufficiently devote the engineering resources. I mean, I still prefer to see something engineered first and styled after, but that's just me. But kudos to him to even saying, I challenge others to meet us on capability. That's the gauntlet thrown in the correct direction.
Yeah, I think I agree completely on that. That's really important. And when he says, there's one part where he says Bentley doesn't have the heritage, he's really referring to that off-road heritage, because obviously they have other heritage, but
plenty of heritage, especially when you start talking supercharging.
Right.
And luxury.
Well, yeah.
On the importance of heritage, he said, and this is a quote, DNA is what differentiates you, because once technology, quality, sustainability, whatever it is, once those things become comparable from one manufacturer to another, what are you left with? You're left with the DNA, the essence of your brand. Design is the essence, the conduit that communicates what it's about, so it's fundamentally important. Further on, we talk about Defender, and there's a lot of debate over talking to traditionalists. Will the new Defender satisfy the traditionalists? Well, with the greatest respect to them, they're not going to buy the new one anyway, so it's irrelevant. This vehicle will have to appeal to a whole new generation of people, young people, people who aren't as cognizant of the brand as traditionalists or specialists. So does it matter? I've had customers come up to me on the stand and say, you're ruining this brand. And I say, oh, really? I'm actually making it a lot of money.
Well, he is kind of right, but at the same time.
Yeah, and maybe that those of us who do feel he's ruining the brand, I wouldn't say he's ruining the brand, but it's not what I would have liked to see the brand become.
I think the word you're looking for is
doing
change.
Well.
He's changed the brand.
Well, the sales numbers would back him up, unfortunately. But
yep.
But I mean, my only real argument with what he's saying is he's saying that the diehards and the enthusiasts aren't going to buy it anyway. I think he's only partly right. We're just not going to buy it new. In
right.
20 or 30 years, when there's a bunch of them floating around, if they're still around, we're going to snap them up and we're going to hammer them, and then we'll find out how good he was.
May I throw in an observation for us? When Land Rover designed the series models or the Discoveries or the first Range Rovers, there was no particular thought that there would ever be an end to the automobile era as we understand it now. So the idea of building a vehicle with longevity in mind, same general body styles, etc., all of that was sort of a working assumption. So if you're an automotive manufacturer today, in today's environment, and a good example was your earlier commentary on diesels in the UK, you actually don't know what regulations will come in place that may alter the capacities that you build into your vehicles. You may discover that people care less about longevity when they're leasing or renting self-driving cars or pods of some sort. Right now, a challenge for manufacturers, sadly, has to be, as possible, to commit to my brand such that if my brand has to change dramatically, simply because the regulatory environment and the societal expectations for an automobile change dramatically, what am I going to be designing for? Or what am I going to be engineering for? A perfect example is our conundrum, I think, with the Defender. A vehicle today, by regulation, has to carry an amount of electronic, technological, digitized, would have been unthinkable for any of us who are enthusiasts as early as 10 years ago. Now must equip a vehicle to do things on behalf of the driver that none of us particularly ask for as enthusiasts, but you can't sell a vehicle that doesn't do that. I'm reminded of a time I had off-roading with a Range Rover Evoque, whose cameras beeped at me constantly to let me know that there was brush on the side of the trail. It was like 1 10-minute screech, because of course there's brush on the side of the trail. It's a trail. But there was no choice. You can't turn those off by regulatory environment, or else the manufacturer is implicitly liable. So I think the conundrum for Land Rover and for any manufacturer is we have to build in more short-term sales in order for us to be able to sell in this regulatory environment.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that's become an issue for all the manufacturers, obviously. And, to Gerry's and your mention of, yes, there's this looming potential end to vehicles and driving as we know it, which we've discussed numerous times in the past, and I'm sure we will be discussing for quite some time, or certainly hopefully for quite some time. Everything is sort of upended by technology, and I think it's important to note that Land Rover, and Gerry mentions this, is still working very hard on the technology side to make sure that their vehicles are some of the most capable vehicles, in addition to, all of Gerry's design work that he's focusing on. And that might not have been the current state of Land Rover. So that's at least reassuring, because, in the early days, they were very utilitarian vehicles. Even when the Range Rover was introduced, it was supposed to be much more of a comfortable luxury vehicle, but still extremely utilitarian. But at this point, utilitarian vehicles aren't really necessary in today's world for the vast majority of people. There are so many alternatives to using your vehicle for, even bringing things to and from the market. You can order stuff and have it delivered, or you can have a delivery person just show up and ship it, and that's all optimized around the globe.
Or your stuff can be delivered by a drone strike.
Right, exactly. And that's going to just keep increasing in terms of the amount of change and the number of factors in the industry. So it is probably not a bad thing that Gerry has pushed in those directions of trying to tie people to the brand, make them love the brand, move the brand forward. And I'm just glad that at least while they're being forced to put in all this new technology, that they're making sure that the technology is still there to maintain the off-road capability.
I'd like to add,
and really, it seems like they're making it too easy in many cases, but that's probably a good thing in terms of safety.
To pair it on to that, Morgan, I'd like to add that it's not just the regulation of various governments around the world, what they're doing. It's also their customers. Their customers are asking for this. They want a comfortable vehicle. They want the tech in the vehicle. They want it to do the things that they wanted to do, and that what they wanted to do has changed. Different, as you mentioned, Morgan, years ago, 20, 30, 40 years ago, what you do with a vehicle is much different than what you do with it today.
And I think also there's the expectations have changed, and people no longer expect that they have to learn how to drive to operate a vehicle. And they want, the vehicles have so many technologies that do the thinking for them, so that they don't have to.
And right, and that's coming too. But that's the tech side of it, Harold. Almost everything that goes on in our world these days is, tech driven. Well, it really has been for millennia. It's just that the tech is going faster and can do more. So that's now has been visited into vehicles, and it's there, and it's concrete, and it's something that we enjoy. So it's directly impacting us. It's not. So my point of that is, again, it's not just regulation. It's not. It's the marketplace, and that's what people are expecting. That's coming.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think that what goes with that also is that you're talking about the hobby, and if you're going to have a hobby, following, brand loyalty is what drives the hobby. It's nothing without your brand identity, and so Gerry's thrust towards design is building that brand loyalty, or at least that's his goal.
Right.
Yep. One of the things that is very interesting about your point, John, that, it is not just the regulation, it is also the customers. And part of that, going back to my comments on how the vehicles were used, it's really how we live these days, right? Because when Land Rovers first came out, the vast majority of people were doing physical labor just to maintain their lives. At this point, there are plenty of people in the world still doing hard physical labor, but we are actually important things. Exactly.
Thank you, Harold.
But that number is decreasing rapidly, and we are still fighting to try to figure out how to maintain jobs for people as we use technology to optimize and minimize the number of people needed to do various jobs.
You got awful close to business speak there. Come on, careful.
It's less the business speak; it's a little the IT speak. So I apologize for that.
That's okay.
I want to offer one more thought, if I could.
Absolutely.
Relative to what you folks have been talking about. This was presented by a Land Rover executive at the New York Auto Show, I think 3 years ago. Land Rover and others are doing significant studies on demographics worldwide, because Land Rover, of course, pays attention to its 180 markets, not just the U.S. The world is urbanizing at an extraordinary rate. So the demand for the utility vehicle has diminished because urban areas have fewer needs for a multi-purpose vehicle. If they need a truck, there are trucks available for them. But by and large, the population, mirroring exactly what you guys have been speaking about, is definitely changing its own needs for any kind of vehicle. And the more urbanized our world gets, the less demand there is for a specialty vehicle aimed at utility. And therefore, it isn't a surprise that so many of the recent Land Rover product are aimed at an urban, a suburban, and exurban world, and far less at places like where I live and would use my Land Rover for. As much as I would never voluntarily join that exodus into a city, I have to recognize that I'm a smaller and smaller portion of that marketplace.
Right. You and I are becoming far less relevant, Jeff.
Oh my gosh, don't remind me. Every day I know that.
Yeah. Sad fact, but yes.
Yes. So the other side of this is, even if you go back to Land Rover's marketing in the 1970s and 80s, you find that by and large, the Series 388s and the earliest 110s were really oriented at what they called then a leisure market. You saw fewer and fewer that necessarily were advertised as work vehicles, more and more to throw your climbing gear in or to tow your boat or your caravan for vacationing. That doesn't make them bad, but it certainly started to change the focus. And when you are talking about expectations of a daily driver, such as we all use ours, the expectation, the demand of a daily driver is for a much kind of different vehicle than the one that Land Rover promoted in the, say, 1950s and 60s, which was simply a utility vehicle that would make it to town and no matter what the weather, for your occasional visit.
On bringing the Land Rover into the modern era. So, quote, we at Land Rover do have a unique heritage that has evolved over many years, but we're not harnessed by that. We acknowledge that heritage, but it is a case of looking forward. So and he goes on to talk about there was a design Bible that would have design cues and philosophies that had evolved over many years. It's fairly thick and large. Then he goes on to say, and this goes to, I think, your point that you were trying to make, Harold, that there is the modern vehicle, then there's this, what I think Gerry calls a specialist, and I think that's where we are. He says, it was very much a specialist brand appealing to people who wanted the ultimate in off-road capability. We're moving away from that, and that's clear. And I think Gerry has acknowledged that, and that's why he's moving Land Rover away from that and paying homage, I think is probably the best word, to the past.
And Gerry's not a hobbyist. He's not an off. His thing is the design, so that's what he's going to focus on.
Yeah, and I will say that general automobile market has become more advanced and safer through technology and standards and everything. Their generally off-road capabilities of most vehicles has improved, but it is nice that Land Rover has stayed ahead, because as the market of vehicle owners has shifted from people who felt that they had to learn how to drive, had to learn, the appropriate ways to handle different situations, now that's not really how new drivers consider it something that they have to learn all the skills. It is better.
And they don't have to memorize which of the four sticks does what.
Right. Most people can get into, everybody at this point, if you go and buy a new car, they all have lots of safety features, reversing cameras, traction control, all of that makes it easier to drive in inclement weather, regardless of whatever it is. But Land Rover really still goes above and beyond in that area, even compared to all the other luxury brands who have off-road capabilities. Pretty much, if you buy it off the lot as is, even with all-season tires, you're going to get a lot further with a Land Rover than you are with any other brand. With the exception of probably Jeep, that's the closest competition in terms of off-road capability off the lot, but it's probably still going to be easier in the Land Rover, especially with the newer models.
I like to say that a Land Rover is capable of getting stuck in places that only another Land Rover will get you out of.
Absolutely.
So there's another article. This came out of Forbes, and they quote Gerry as saying this, and I'm not sure if he actually did or not, but I like the quote. DNA is a DNA. Don't fuck with it. I don't know if he actually said that, but that's what he put in there, which is cool.
Doesn't strike me as something Gerry would say, at least not in those words, but okay.
But he goes on to say, people buy into a brand because of the essence of it. Design communicates what the brand stands for. Why modify it to highlight a certain propulsion system? People don't buy a propulsion system. People buy a Range Rover. I think you see where he's going there. And that's why the looks are important. A Range Rover is a Range Rover, no matter the powertrain. And then he goes on to say, I have a team within...
As long as it looks like a Range Rover, I agree with that.
I have a team within the team to focus on SVO elements, but we are amplifying the extreme capability. It is very important that we maintain the integrity of the vehicle. I don't want customers to think that if they're not driving in an SVO, they're not in a great Range Rover. So he's trying to thread the needle here of having Range Rovers and then having these special Range Rovers in the SVO line being very personalized, but still wants people to spend the extra money on those, but also wants folks to still buy a regular Range Rover and feel no matter what, they're still in a Range Rover.
Right. It's a delicate balance between the SVO adding to Range Rover without taking away from the non-SVO Range Rovers.
Right.
A little interesting point here regarding the SVO. He says sometimes John and his SVO team want to do certain things to the car that's not right for Range Rover, and I'll say no. Design will be considered even down to the butch appearance of the sidewall treads on the new Discovery SVX. I thought that was interesting. Gerry, he's, which I get. I get it. Maybe it's a different way to look at it is it's better than maybe him not being concerned about the tread on the Disco. that's also bad, because then they're not worried about the whole vehicle, and they're not worried about the whole thing and how it looks and how it comes together. So, we may be a little concerned about Gerry's direction, but at least he is tied into all aspects of design in the vehicle.
It is good for, that brand image to not have SVO putting out things that look ugly because some engineer who thought they could put all the coolest gadgets on there. We certainly see lots of Land Rovers, Jeeps, all sorts of vehicles over here in the U.S. who have had all sorts of modifications bolted on that you're like, okay, that went above and beyond.
Well, like I often say, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right.
And the business person in Gerry and Mr. McGovern, they're losing money too, because when that happens, they would prefer to have that stuff be done by them, and then they could make that money. Just don't let that escape your notice.
Oh, of course. And I think it's, obviously, I don't think that we should ever not have third-party modifiers. I think that's extremely important. I know he would prefer to not have third-party modifiers, but I would much rather have Land Rover have SVO producing their special vehicles that are above and beyond their, primary stock vehicles than not, and still have third-party modification companies out there. And I will also say, for those of us who are less likely to buy the brand new vehicles because we're not quite the same demographic, even though we're Land Rover fans, I really tout Land Rover for creating their classics workshop, Land Rover Reborn, in the SVO workshops, because that allows them to reproduce the older vehicles that we like. Yes, it's probably still outside of our price range, but it means that they are still bringing them out, supporting us in those vehicles, which normally they wouldn't still be able to produce.
Well, and the benefit to us is that I think that's going to put more parts into production that may have been unavailable prior or harder to get. Might free up the parts supply for the rest of us. And the other thing I think it does also is it legitimizes the notion of restoring an older vehicle and creates more demand for it. So those of us who are in the business of doing restorations and servicing the older vehicles get a little boost from the fact that the factory is now putting credibility into it.
Right. Yeah, you can either wait and pay them, or you can pay someone else, probably slightly less, and get it sooner.
A little bit less, yeah. Call me anytime.
Yeah.
No, you wait until the 110's done. And then you can call it.
I've got a list, and you're welcome to be on it.
Let's talk about some specific vehicles for a few moments. The 2020 Range Rover Evoque. Did I say Evoque right? I always worry about that.
You did.
Thank you.
You did.
Ding, ding, ding.
They're re-upping the model, and it looks like it's going to be inspired somewhat by the Velar. It still will look like an Evoque. They've rounded some things, and there are less creases on the new one. There's some spy shots, and you'll see those in the story.
There were creases on the Evoque?
Well, that's the word they use here in the story. It says the rest of the vehicle looks like the current Evoque, albeit with some of the sharper creases smoothed out.
It's good for aerodynamics.
That's what the Velar was. I mean, the Velar certainly has that. It's Range Rover with a lot less creases. Looks like they'll keep the 5-door model, and there's that continued discussion that maybe the 3-door is gone. The inside, though, is going to get an update, and I think looks like they plan to use that Velar stacked dual screen center stack. And it's supposed to be lighter, and also alternative powertrain capability is obviously coming, probably a plug-in, so that's coming.
And I'm sure that is the prime model for an all-electric test bed as well.
Good question.
Eventually.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're starting with, plug-in hybrids and the like, but that being the smallest and lightest would be very easy to move to all-electric earlier than the other models. It
is the most sensible one to make that change with.
A Land Rover mulls a 2-door SUV as flagship to have the Velar, but there's been discussion of a Road Rover possibly as being a two-door flagship.
Right on. There's a name I've not heard in a while.
Executive at JLR SVO could be a limited run. The proposed ultra-luxurious two-door SUV. Nothing's official yet from what we can tell, but it's still out there. Looks like it's maybe under development alongside the next generation Jaguar XL. The sedan could round out Land Rover's portfolio should customers ever fall out of love with SUVs. Sounds like more of a car sedan than it would be an SUV. Is this the Land Rover possibly getting out of SUVs?
Kind of sounds like Land Rover's trying to invade Jag's turf as revenge for Jag invading Land Rover's turf.
Well, I think we discussed maybe 2 months ago on the podcast. I can't remember exactly how long it's been. And didn't we think it was going to share the same platform as the Jaguar?
It would make sense that they would.
And that's what this article indicates, yes.
Yeah.
That was the original prototype name for the Range Rover before it came out, and they were doing over car bodies on Land. It was actually, to be honest, rather butt ugly, but it was kind of a cool concept.
Yeah, it was. They were really horrible looking, but it was a very cool concept, and that, I mean, in some ways, I like that Land Rover has been pulling out these old project code names. It's Velar, Road Rover. Road Rover is going to start confusing people if it's a Land Rover, Range Rover, Road Rover.
No, that's
yeah.
Not going to happen. I don't see it happening. And I think that's the only heritage that Gerry appreciates is the old code names.
But at least somebody from the past.
SVO line will keep broadening Land Rover appeal. Kind of hinted this earlier, but that seems to be McGovern's thought. We've tried to broaden the appeal of the brand, not just Range Rover, but Land Rover in general. Previously, the Land Rover brand was very specialist, but we have moved it into vehicles that are generally universally desirable, not just generic. He says it's not just about making money. Rather, it's about a commodity just as valuable to a car manufacturer's integrity. And that goes to the comment earlier about he makes sure that what's coming out of SVU lines up with what they're doing on the rest of the line. His focus is on curating the brand in the right way.
I want to, John, could I throw a thought in here for us to discuss? Gerry McGovern is the Chris Bangle of this century. In the 90s, Chris Bangle changed dramatically the styling of BMWs, and he jumped like Jay Mays did for Volkswagen. And these designers, harkening back to the days of Virgil Exner and Raymond Louis, have become their own brand, which is why when Ford owned Land Rover, they put Gerry to work on the Lincoln lineup and on the Explorer. When they came out before, it's not surprising that some Discovery models started to look like Explorers. He is his own brand as well. And while he may have a long run at Land Rover as a designer, he is a spokesperson for design because that is indeed, quote, his Bible. But he's the one who wrote the current Bible that Land Rover uses on the design side. And I have a hunch that if we sat down with Nick Rogers, Mark Burniston, and some other of the executives from the engineering side, they would be very complimentary to the designers as to how they fold in the engineering necessities. But it is very much more of a collaboration than the articles that have interviewed Gerry McGovern indicate in the tone of their article. I agree he is the spokesperson for it, and he's a driving force behind unifying a look to all Land Rover product. But just as Ian McCallum has done with Jaguar, Gerry McGovern has to work with the engineers who really dictate what capabilities will be available for the vehicle. The brand DNA, as we understand it, certainly has design elements. Look at what Spen King did with the Range Rover Classic. But underneath it all it's engineering. It's what the engineering made possible, what the design promised. So the appearance of a Range Rover promises certain things. There are engineers who do the interior and designers who work together on that in the interior. And there are packaging engineers who determine the capabilities and sizes of that product line. So I'm always intrigued when the designers become the most prominent spokespeople. Maybe that's just their nature. as if the engineering of the vehicle doesn't play a real role. And I have a different impression from talking with Land Rover executives, and including meeting and talking with Gerry McGovern himself about that. I think it's just much more collaborative than sometimes it's put out in the automotive interviews that are done.
I think that's a good point, Jeff, because the designers really are big personalities, and I think that's part of what goes into design is to project that personality. And so, yeah, they really come across as the front man in the band, but let's not forget the engineers who are the bass players and the backup guitars and that sort of thing.
And I think a big part of it is as well that the designers are focusing so much on what the end user, the vehicle buyer in this case, will see and touch and drive, right? That generally their language that they're speaking is much more understandable to the everyday user, right? Because it's what they can see and touch in front of them.
Right, and your average user doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, most of us are in the IT field, either currently or formerly. We're used to dealing with very technical people and processes and equipment, and it's harder for us often to convey to the end user what exactly we are bringing to them, right? Because often it's something that we actually don't want them to feel or see or touch, right? We just want things to work for them and to be easier for them. So I think that's another part of the reason that the designers tend to be so forefront, right?
Well, let me challenge you.
Well, it is what people see, first and foremost, as you point. And most people don't understand the technical stuff. They don't understand foot-pounds and acceleration times. But I, on the other hand, coming from a technical background, can look past a lot of design shortcomings. I still appreciate a good design and attractive vehicle, but you know, if it can do 0 to 60 in 3.5, I don't care if it looks like a Jeep.
Let me challenge you a little bit on.
I agree
on this topic. I generally agree with what you're saying, and it's generally, I think McGovern in design has been very good for Land Rover, but he's changed Land Rover. I think it's different than it was, and it certainly seems to me that while yes, I do agree there's probably more collaboration going on across all aspects of Land Rover and probably even Jaguar than the articles talk about, because you know, design is typically creative and they're usually more outgoing people, so they are going to be your forefront folks. I get that. But it seems that while it's collaborative, I think I just get that impression and feel that it's more on the design side than it is on the engineering side of the house. And it seems that has changed, that it's all about the looks and the feel, and it's all about what's the capability. And that's the only word he ever uses is capability. He doesn't, there's very rarely do I see, at least especially McGovern, talk about wading depth or talking about the ability to go through snow or something along those lines. It's usually about the look and feel, the materials, and how do the vehicle luxurious, and does it appeal to a broad.
Well, that's the language he speaks, and those are the things he understands.
Right, and to the average user, they're going to see the design, and capability is probably the most accurate term that that the average user is going to understand as well, right? That they just want to know whether they can get through, a foot of snow or
I'm just trying
across the desert.
I'm just trying to challenge and highlight that I think it seems that the corner has been turned. I'll use that analogy since we're in the automotive area. Corner has been turned. It is no longer. I think it used to be more engineering, and then design followed. It now seems that design leads and engineering follows. Is that good or bad? I think that's obviously, we'll let the voters decide.
I think that is an accurate assessment. I think the scales have tipped.
That may be a better way to put that.
Well, and to Jeff's point, I think that it really may be far more in our perception through media, that through most of the media, it's described, because Gerry it tends to be the face and the voice of Land Rover and the new vehicles at this point, that it feels like it has tipped. But maybe it is just still much closer to a good balance than we really think of, because there still is a lot of impressive engineering going on in the new vehicles that the designers didn't necessarily have to allow or support or make work.
And you're right. I do agree with that. I do agree with what you said, but I also think a thing to think about is that vehicles have become a commodity. And it's different. They're all pretty much interchangeable. I know there's, this one's supposed to be way more capable and can do this, but pretty much any vehicle can do anything another vehicle can do for the most part, especially modern ones. At least that's my belief. Throw in a good set of tires. But the design is what differentiates you from the rest of the pack. Going down that path, that's good for Land Rover. It's good for McGovern to do this. Is setting them up, and that is evidenced by increased sales and good design. People are buying that, and because and if that is their new DNA, that's their new DNA.
Right, and the majority of the buyers really don't have capability, and they don't need much more than them because they're only using it to go to the mall or to work or whatever.
But I will say, on the technology side, that yes, the design and the vast majority of the usage it doesn't need that technology, but compared to some of the other brands, Land Rover has really stuck with it. I mean, the new Discovery 5 has an extremely impressive weighting depth. There's no reason that they had to go through the effort to make that happen, but they still did. So I think that there's a lot more collaboration with the engineering side to make sure that there really is differentiation on the technical side.
Well, and I think
start getting into it.
And I think the moment that you stop doing that, you've killed the brand.
Right.
I think that, because that's always been the strong point, you have to keep, at least attempting to keep up with that stuff. Otherwise, it's just, there is no difference. And you've killed what's left of the brand.
Right. When Tata bought Land Rover, they said, yes, you can sort of stay semi-independent. And one of the things that I will fully support is to bring design up to the same level as engineering, whereas previously design had been underneath in terms of the business structure, right?
Right.
I think that's a really big part of why it feels like it has switched so that design is in the forefront. But I think it really is, as Jeff, more balanced than we think.
Right, and balance is a good thing, but I will say, thank God Mr. Tata is a car guy.
Well, he's also an architect. So
right, but I mean, he gets it, and you need your guy in charge to get it, otherwise you're screwed.
So the Range Rover is coming up with a SV autobiography. You're talking about Land Rover moving into the luxury side of the house. This is the top of the line luxury. It's everything about the passenger. In this case, they're going to have the two individual rear seats recline up to 40 degrees, pamper passengers with heating from shoulders to calves, and a massage function. Land Rover calls it hot stone massage. It's actually heated stones are likely virtual, though. Power-operated rear doors mitigate the danger from manicure damaging door handles. It will have a small refrigerator able to hold not one, but 2 bottles of bubbly with glasses. And it has its own 4G Wi-Fi hotspot. And the usual Range Rover capability when it comes to the engineering side, but those are the special things you get with that SV at a base price. Again, this is a base price. I'm not saying the final price. This is the base price. $207,900 American.
I'm surprised they even admit to that, because really, if you have to ask, you really shouldn't be buying it anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, this is to compete with Bentley and the Mercedes and all that stuff, so it's up there. So if I don't know that anybody that listens to the show would buy one, but if you do, hey, we'd like to check that puppy out.
Yeah, send it to us for testing.
That's right. Continuing information coming out of the LA Auto Show, there was a lot of discussion about Land Rover and electrification. And, we'll talk in a moment about the plug-in hybrid, but generally they are moving into electrification of the brand. Of course, they don't say, I've never seen any discussion about the outside forces that are causing this to happen. And it's saying, you just keep reading that Land Rover wants to electrify the entire brand. But let's be clear, that's I don't know if it's all that critical, but there are market forces doing that, and regulations doing that, as a number of countries, as we know, we're keeping a list, are outlawing,
including the home market,
are outlawing the purchase of internal combustion engine vehicles starting, I think, in 2025 is the earliest. So Land Rover's moving into this, taking some baby steps. Some are saying they're playing catch up in some ways. They've finally moving into the EV market, and they're going to have full EVs, they're going to have plug-ins, they're going to have mild hybrids. I'm not exactly sure what that meant, but they will end up having a full range not only of petrol, diesel, and also electric. They're going to continue to make petrol and diesel as efficient as possible, and then electrification should complement those powertrains as best as they can, and how it, of course, fits with the brand, as Mr. McGovern would say. A couple interesting little notes here from this article. They've also addressed perhaps the only drawback of e-assistance, and that is audible feedback of the motor with 2 channels in the audio system to cancel it out. And they've been obsessive in these areas to retain Range Rover formula of capability and refinement while still being electrified.
Yeah, I think it's good that they're focusing on some of the other refinements, since obviously that is their branding at this point, right? Is how refined
their DNA,
the Range Rover line. Yeah, that's their new DNA, I guess. Mm-hmm. Part of it.
Yep.
Maybe the majority of it.
No.
We're still on the fence.
Oh no! Come on! No, they've gone premium. I mean, that's where they're making their most money. They've gone premium. They've gone upscale. They've gone. That's when they say refinement. That's what they're talking about.
They've been, shooting for that high-end market since the Range Rover, at least in the U.S. market, for the most part. In the home market, they've always had the lower-end models, but in the U.S., ever since Range Rover and Discovery came out, it's been the higher-end models that have been released here. On the electric drivetrain stuff, the comment about them playing catch-up is interesting because electric, maybe they're playing catch up on the hybrid side of things, but for electric, that's just not something that an SUV has really been able to push into in the past. Only recently have all electric SUVs come out, and they're really not SUVs like the Tesla Model X. It's impressive for an all-electric vehicle, and it's SUV-like, but it's really not an SUV. It's much more akin to a crossover minivan kind of vehicle. So I wouldn't necessarily say that they're playing catch-up in that area.
Some specifics about the plug-in Range Rover that is coming is it's a 13.3 kilowatt battery pack made by Samsung. It is wrapped in an aluminum case under the cargo hold and sized to allow a claimed 31 miles of electric-only range. And they think that will fit the normal round-trip commute of 27 miles. I assume that's a UK thing. It will allow for off-roading on pure electric power in both grass, gravel, snow, and mud rut modes. Apparently that's something that's new in that space. The plug-in hybrid model will maintain the 35.4-inch water fording capability of the normal Range Rover. They don't advertise water fording in the EV model because in EV mode, which is the all-electric mode, with the engine off, a water fording will flood the exhaust system, and that's not good, as it eventually can ruin the catalytic converter, among other things.
Oh yeah, that's actually a really good point.
Seems to me that's just a check valve or some sort of flap away from being possible, though. If your engine is shut off and your computer is managing that, why couldn't it just close a valve at the end of the exhaust to exclude water?
It's a good point, but what would that do for trying to crank it up in the first place with the exhaust system full of water?
Well, but the thing is, if it's got a valve on the end of the tailpipe that closes it off to keep water out of the system, as soon as it wants the engine, it opens that and starts cranking.
Yeah, that's
like the rain caps on a farm tractor.
Right.
But some sort of better version of that.
They may have considered some of that, maybe not specifically the flap, but it says here, owners prepare for deep water crossing. They typically raise the suspension. So to protect the exhaust, Land Rover programmed the gas engine to turn on anytime the suspension is raised. But if you want the raised suspension and don't want any water crossing and don't plan any water crossing, you can select EV mode since the suspension is up and run on pure battery again. So they have some considerations there for that. Turning on when to turn on the gas. If you raise it up, it automatically turns on the gas engine. or turns on the engine, I guess, even if it's diesel. And then you could then switch back to all electric if you know you're not going to get in any water.
Oh, perfect. So that you still have the option to put it, extend the suspension, press the EV mode, and then shove a potato in your tailpipe and still do your water crossing.
There you go. A waiting plug.
Yeah.
A waiting plug.
Well, actually, I think they send a drone by with a plug for that. They know you've done that, and they send a drone and it puts it in for you because we don't want you getting out of the vehicle.
True.
Yes.
I wouldn't want to ruin my manicure.
Yeah. With the internal door handles, doors automatically open for you. Yes, this was a neat thing with the nav system I thought was really interesting. They have predictive energy optimization. You plug in your destination, and the system takes a look at the available routes and figures out which one is the most efficient. But beyond that, it looks for any hilly routes because the Rover can use pure electric torque to go up the grades, because it knows the battery will have the chance to regenerate some of that power on the way down. That's something new I hadn't heard. That would actually really be good for the Pittsburgh area. Probably very helpful with all the hills we have here. So that was kind of a neat new efficiency maneuver as part of the plug-in hybrid.
Right. You get some of it back on the other side of the hill, not all of it. It's not like you can create perpetual motion or anything with your route.
But you can definitely extend your range at that point. You may not get
Correct.
all of it.
Yeah, I've been waiting for that technology to become a little more common in terms of the route planning that generally it's going for the shortest route or maybe the one with least traffic, but the most efficient route should also be taken into consideration or be an option.
Yeah, Tesla's take into account for their efficiency routes, where chargers are and superchargers are. So that at least Tesla has done that. But this is a new thing on road without doing any charging.
Yep.
Shift to electric vehicles from 2020 may drag margins for JLR. Basically, the fact that the high cost of batteries in electric vehicles and the unknown factor, how much and to what extent customers will be willing to pay for those batteries, are major challenges, according to JLR CFO Ken Greger. JLR has launched an internal corporate efficiency program called LEAP. I think we mentioned that before. And part of it is to look at the cost of electrification and also likelihood that margins in China will be normalized over time. I don't know what that means. So they're looking at these things. Part of this concern about the future is one of the reasons that they opened up that factory in Slovakia in order to have a low cost per manufactured unit by being able to build a vehicle there. So I think this affects all manufacturers, is the cost of batteries, which actually there was another article about that specifically. Battery costs could put the brakes on electric car sales. Battery prices need to drop by more than half before electric vehicles will be competitive with cars powered by internal combustion engines, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, whose two-day Future of Energy Summit in Shanghai concluded this Wednesday. That's likely to happen by 2026, when the cost for lithium-ion battery packs is projected to fall to about $100 per kilowatt hour, discussed at that meeting. So something to consider, especially I think on the Tesla route and on the Bollinger route. They're still waiting for the cost of these electric batteries to come down.
Well, two things need to happen. Number one, the cost of the battery needs to drop, and the lifespan of the battery needs to go up, because both of those things are going to affect sales.
Right.
Let's move ahead to discussion of the new Defender. There were reports that came out earlier this month of the new Defender is close to being revealed, and there were actually some photos of what is thought to be the new Defender on the streets of Birmingham, I believe. And then also McGovern talked about it at the LA Auto Show, and he said it was going to be polarizing. And I'm looking for my highlighted comments. Damn it, where did they go? And he was talking about that and basically saying that the design is going to be polarizing, and we pretty much we need to get over it.
Well, that's been said for years now, John. It's always polarizing to talk about the new Defender. The one thing that is traditional and is constant with the Defender is the discussion will always be polarizing.
Well, he's saying that the new design is really not going to appeal to the specialists or to those of us that like the old one, and we pretty much need to move on from that. It's going to be different, right, and you need to move on. It will be
nothing
capable.
New. It's the same thing that's been said.
Exactly. So, but that's that's coming out. It's not going to be derivative of the old one. I suspect that there will probably be very few cues from the old model. I think that's what they've been setting us up for. Will there be rounded fenders? Who knows? But I suspect not. But why don't we talk about specifically the photos that came out? Because it looks like they took an Evoque and cut it down and then wrapped it on this frame, which is believed to be the Defender frame, so they could do street testing of the new frame.
And it's interesting you use the word frame, because as I understand it, it's going to be unitized.
Most likely, that's the thought there too, Harold. That yes, it looks like it will be. It's going to be coil there. Let's see. There's a size here. The wheelbase. Thanks to Fun Rover, Ben at Fun Rover did some breakdown here. The wheelbase is the biggest giveaway, that it's a Defender development mule. It's too short to be anything else. It definitely looks to be close to the old model's 92.9-inch wheelbase.
So it's a cut-down disco, basically.
The registration on the vehicle, just which I thought was pretty smart for people to check out, it listed it as just Land Rover Black. There were two models that were seen as test mules, and this one, the registration listed as Land Rover Black. The emissions is listed as nil, so which gave folks to think that maybe this might be an all-electric model, which fits in with Land Rover's move to electrification. There was a lot of discussion about is the new Defender going to be all electric?
Well, there does seem to be a muffler and tailpipes in the spy photos, but that doesn't mean that it's actually hooked up to anything.
Correct.
Right. They could be dummy pipes, but
Yep.
It could also be a PHEV, and they could still list it as minimal emissions, because as long as they still are running on battery, it's still producing the same emissions as an all-electric.
Well, and of course, we can also go back to the fact that this is a test vehicle, so they might not actually have to put any specific emissions on it.
True, they could say whatever they want for that.
Right, because it's not like this is actually a Land Rover Black.
Well, I'm always leery of spy shots because there's so much ambiguity around it. There's no question you are going to run a drivetrain of a vehicle on a test bed of some sort, and you are going to camouflage it with a wrap so that it has a certain look. But ultimately, the real point that I think American enthusiasts have to remember about the Defender was the beloved NAS Defender was a very expensive vehicle for its time here. And the optional, more bare bones models that were available in the rest of the world with diesel engines could never be made available here because of our regulations at the time, and because of the perceived marketing pressures. We all have to remember that when Land Rover sold the NAS Defender in this country, every dealer will tell you that until it was announced that they weren't going to be around anymore, it was difficult to sell them. Remember, we only brought in about 1,500 a year, and it was hard to sell them. They lingered. So while my preference is for a much more bare-bone vehicle than Land Rover currently offers in the United States, and maybe even currently manufactures, it is not an easily saleable vehicle. I have had discussion with Land Rover North American people routinely and been reminded in response routinely that when the Range Rover Hunter was made available in the early 90s, I believe it's a 91 model, somebody correct me if you know better, that Hunter was a very tough sell. I thought it was the best thing ever to come out of Land Rover. It was a return to the shag carpet, rear mat that you could take a hose to, farmer's estate of the original Range Rover. It was the closest thing, and they couldn't sell them. It just wasn't a demand. We present that dilemma to Land Rover as a market. If they're going to produce a vehicle that's going to sell in more lucrative markets, it has to be a vehicle that people will actually buy. And that is why I believe that the new Defender will have capabilities that would have been unimaginable to us who are Series 2A drivers like myself, or Series 3 like you guys, or the NAS Defenders.
And that fits with what McGovern has been saying. It's got to be a global car. It's got to meet the customers all around the world, and they are pretty much demanding comfort, electronics, capabilities that are usually mechanical and electric. So that fits in with what you're saying, Jeff. Yeah.
If you think of it, and you certainly see it in the British road tests of the last of the Defenders, some of them still came off the assembly line leaking. If you consider the amount of electronics and digital technology required to be in vehicles today, you just can't have a car that leaks like we're used to. No. There's nothing to get wet in my Series 2A unless I leave my laptop on the seat.
In fact, your Series 2A would run just fine underwater.
Yes. To my chagrin, I learned that once. But and I guess the demand for that kind of vehicle is simply driven by different consumer demands. Now, as far as its appearance goes, here I would disagree with Gerry McGovern as to what its appearance must be. But the McGovern Bible, his book of the Bible for automotive design, does have certain cues that he considers to be essential. And sales would indicate that they've won the day. My concern for the Defender will be whatever its appearance, that I can see exactly where the front of the vehicle is from the driver's seat, and I can see where the rear of the vehicle is, so that when I am off-road, I know exactly where the extreme ends of the vehicles are, and I can make my decisions as a driver accordingly. I also need to be able to shut off certain equipment that will only get in the way off-road. Even the Discovery 5 has the capacity, albeit you have to dig deep into its manual to find it, to actually shut off certain of the traction control components that would work against you in an extreme or counterintuitive situation. I'm just hoping that in terms of a regulatory environment, they're still allowed to actually make that happen. And I'm hoping that the design cues allow me to see the edges of the vehicle, something that's a little harder than I would like in the Discovery 5, and something that's sort of absent completely from the Velar.
Well, maybe that's where the engineers will get to have more say on that side, and maybe make it easier to turn off some of those electronic things. Maybe they'll actually.
It's possible. I'm just hoping that the solution is not technological alone. You can put a camera there that will let me see the edge of the car, but I don't want to be looking at the screen, the dual screen in the middle of the dashboard. I want to be looking out the windscreen, and I want a rear window that I can actually see out of. Right. And I'd prefer to have side pillars thin enough so I can look around the sides of the car.
They certainly should have the capability to do all of that, because I agree completely. Being able to see all the corners of the vehicle without technology, that's helpful in traffic, let alone off-road. One of Land Rover's biggest competitor in the off-road market is Jeep, and they've just come out with what they say is the new redesigned Jeep for 2018. The style design of it is, they've rounded off some more corners and angled some portions of the roof and hood or bonnet to make it a little more aerodynamic, but overall it's still a body-on-frame design and hasn't changed dramatically. I know Gerry wants to change the design far more dramatically, but hopefully if Jeep is able to keep implementing some of the older technologies in a useful off-road manner, hopefully Land Rover can still do some of that. I don't hold much hope there, but they should be able to.
And they might be able to. The difference is that the Jeep Wrangler market, and that's the one I assume we're referring to, the Jeep Wrangler market is largely, although not solely, but largely a U.S.-based market. There are about 400,000 Jeeps produced annually of all of their models, probably a little more now with the newer models. And you probably say about half of them at the most are Wranglers. A difference is that for whatever reasons, Land Rover chose to pull the Defender out of the U.S. So to a large number of potential buyers, it's a new vehicle. And the Land Rover name isn't as well known as the Jeep name. It just has never had that sales numbers. The Jeep niche is large enough to keep producing a body-on-frame vehicle, whereas the Land Rover Defender never got near those numbers of Jeeps that were produced. And of course, they were sending them all over the world, which meant that it's harder to draw a brand impact with fewer vehicles in different countries. Lastly, I just remind everybody, if you've sat in a recent Wrangler, you can't see the sides or ends of those cars either from the driver's seat.
That is very true.
It's a lousy set of compromises, and they've been forced to go to a four-door thing with a sort of roll cage around it. And there's not there just isn't much usable room in that vehicle.
Oh no, it's a 1940s design that really hasn't changed too much. I think in that.
Well, that's the part I like about it. But you're right. The inside experience has lost a lot.
Yes, the inside of the Jeep Wrangler has always been smaller than the Land Rover anyway.
Right,
but it has lost even more.
In non-Land Rover news, the UK diesel tax is not what automakers expected. So sales of diesel cars have fallen over 500,000 to the end of October compared to the same period last year. In the UK, it's down from 48% to 42% market share. And to help arrest the sales slump, manufacturers wanted the UK government, to tax older diesels off the road and reassure buyers that the latest diesels were nice and clean. But that's not what happened. Instead, the government declared that from next April, buyers of all new diesels would pay more duty at sales time compared to the equivalent gasoline engines unless the car was rated to pass a second set of RDE standards, which is real driving emission standards. So just something for our UK listeners, something to consider. JLR admitted that the UK government's move did incentivize the purchase of cleaner diesels, but pointed out that a lot of new car sales would be taxed at a higher rate than before. JLR has the highest diesel penetration of any manufacturer in Europe, with 96% of Land Rovers and 84% of Jaguars sold in the region in 2016.
Wow, I actually did not realize those numbers were so high.
I didn't think they were either.
That's impressive.
Yes.
Well, that tells you how good their diesel technology is.
It's true, yeah. Well, and related to that, I just saw recently a nice short review of the 2018 the Discovery 5 from Auto Trader, which it was of the diesel model. It's a Canadian review so they compare it to some of the other diesels that they have available up there, which are different than what we have available here in the US, but it's not the same as the UK market. And it was actually quite a favorable review, especially on the diesel side of it. I mean, it's a favorable review of the vehicle anyway, and it shows some of the off-road capabilities. But one of the things I thought was especially interesting about their review was that they found the engine to be the quietest of any of the vehicles that they have test driven, not just the diesels. And I think that, we had heard some of the previous reviews saying that Land Rover had tried really hard to make these quiet diesels, especially now that they're in sort of the higher end market and they want to make it easy to sell the vehicle. It's not a loud, clattery diesel. But I was very impressed to hear that it's really the quietest ride of any of the vehicles that they've tested recently.
Did they mention the other ones they tested?
They didn't, but it was sort of a general comparison, especially including the V8 version of the Discovery 5.
Oh, so they didn't just compare it to other diesel vehicles; they compared it to gasoline vehicles.
Oh yes, they were saying compared to even gasoline vehicles.
That is impressive.
That the new diesel in the Discovery 5 is quieter than most vehicles that they test drive. That's very impressive, and that's probably an additional reason that Land Rover has such a high percentage of diesel vehicles. As they move into the luxury market. Obviously, in the UK, they're very used to having Land Rover diesels and them being a strong option. But as they move outwards, and even in the UK, that's an important factor.
If you want to expand your penetration in the American market, you have to kill the notion that diesels must be louder than gasoline.
Right, exactly. And I think, as we get into the newer market where people are not even as familiar with the difference between diesel and gas or petrol vehicles, that the less of those obvious differences that stand out when you go and see it or hear it. They're important.
Well, the Jaguar diesel also got good marks, as I recall, on quietness.
Well, absolutely, but that's all JLR trying to do that within the same company, right?
And it makes sense. It's the same engine, so it should be similar.
Right.
Any word on diesel for the Discovery Sport in the U.S.? Still no. Nothing.
I
right?
mean, not that I have heard.
Yeah. All right. Just kind of annoyed by that. Or actually, I'm kind of pleased by it because then it's less incentive for me to go buy one. Because if they had one, it'd be really tempting, very tempting.
Well, make up your mind.
That's right.
Is it?
Well,
let's finish paying for your 110 first.
Well, there you go. That's a good point. We talked about this a couple times. I've mentioned this, and I finally found an article that supports this. Ford CEO outlines plan to aggressively cut costs. And the important point out of this, and it's not a Ford discussion, but it's a specific point about Ford. They are in fact de-emphasizing passenger cars and are focusing on valuable products which they consider to be trucks and SUVs. Heard this mentioned, and I finally found this article, it was on CNBC, relating to Ford passenger cars are not selling as well, I think worldwide. They are still going to make passenger cars. They are just not going to focus on them as heavy. 76% of Ford sales in the U.S. are trucks and SUVs. So it tells you, I think it's obvious that they're going to de-emphasize passenger vehicles.
Oh, yeah, and it makes sense to focus on what they do best.
And what sells.
Right. Well, but what sells would be what they do best, you'd think.
And a good story, a good Defender story. I'm calling it a good story. A gentleman over the Thanksgiving weekend here in the United States, Sebastian DeWith, is a freelance designer and photographer, had his Land Rover Defender stolen in the San Francisco Bay Area after just having purchased it a little over a year ago. He posted that to social media, I think Reddit in particular, and so a Redditor found it. And I have the post here. I'm here at the vehicle. I can see it. I've called the police and let them know. So a Redditor was able to see the vehicle and reunited Mr. DeWith with his Land Rover. So a win. And it's a nice looking one too. You can have an image here of it going on the flatbed being retrieved. Thankfully, it doesn't look like it was molested either. Which is
I wonder if it was abandoned because the car thief couldn't figure out how to operate it.
Good question. I don't know. That's an excellent question. I don't know.
Well, they managed to steal it in the first place, so that's already something going for them.
Good point. Maybe it was too difficult because it didn't have, power this and power that, and navigation and all that.
Well, and this is also a very common problem in the UK, but I think the difference here is obviously in the UK, a lot of the Defenders are being stolen to sell overseas because there's so much of a markup.
Or they're stripped for parts in 10 minutes flat.
Exactly. So I think that's part of the difference is that over there, the vehicle is going to be very likely to be stripped. Also, obviously, they have a lot of Defenders. So when somebody posts on social media that says a Defender went missing, somebody's going to see a lot of Defenders before they maybe saw the one in question. Whereas here in the U.S., if somebody goes on social media and says, hey, my Defender is missing, if somebody sees a Defender, it's very likely that they're going to compare that with the one that was stolen. And chances are going to be relatively high that it was.
A lot more needles in the UK haystack.
Absolutely.
Which is actually my favorite part of this story. Somebody tweeted at the gentleman and said, did it have a plate attached yet? If not, anything unique I can help to broadcast to tell folks about it.
Nice.
Yeah, which he did reply, and he says, oh yeah, Texas plates, Texas registration sticker, Romania and Scuba driver sticker on the back, spare wheel on the back, metal plating on the hood and bottom of doors.
There you
Perfect.
go.
I know.
Well, that's exactly the kind of thing needed to identify it, and that's a really good Thanksgiving weekend story. That's a good reason for thanks.
Yes, indeed, sir.
And it sounds like it was recovered in perfectly reusable state, which is rare, especially in the UK. You never recover them in the UK intact.
Right. Yeah.
But here in the US, it's a different world.
And finally, in the news for today, just a brief update on the Vermont Overland Rally stuff and coverage that we had a few months ago. Some may not be aware, but Mountain State Overland has been producing videos for a number of years on their overlanding travels in the U.S. They are currently in season 4, and one of the things that they did for this season was to come up prior to Vermont Overland Rally and work with Peter Vollers to go explore Vermont, and they were in attendance at Vermont Overland Rally as well. So much of this season, which is season 4, covers Vermont overlanding, just exploring the Vermont trails on Class 4 roads. So if you want to sort of get a high quality peek at what our terrain is like up here, I highly suggest going in and looking at those videos. So there's a number of videos over the season that cover that. And one of the videos highlights Peter's vehicle, which is a long wheelbase Range Rover Classic, which has quite a number of modifications. It's an extremely capable vehicle. And it was great fun to see it out on the trails at the rally, but it's, nice to get to see it in detail as well on the videos. So something to go check out and, drool over before next year. And I think that registration for Vermont Overland Rally starts on January 1st of 2018. I could be wrong, but it's usually early January and it sells out pretty quick.
Are you signing up this year?
Inspiration to go do that.
Are you signing up this year?
Are you going?
I certainly plan to, yeah. The question is, again, this year, same as last year, do I want to go as a vendor or do I want to go as an individual? I like being there as a vendor. It was great seeing everybody and being on the main field, but I would love to be down in the camps with everybody as well, because I have the benefit of camping separately with the vendors, but also to my detriment that I'm not immersed in the Land Rover crowd down there.
You could go as a vendor and have your space, but you could still hang out in the mosh pit with the trolls, couldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. And I did quite a bit of wandering around in the fields that way.
They didn't ban
but
you.
It's just slightly different.
They didn't ban you, did they?
Oh no, of course not.
Okay, all right. You made it sound like you were separate from everybody else and you weren't allowed into the other areas.
Right. Choose the class you want to identify with.
Yeah, no, you're definitely allowed, but obviously you're also when you're there as a vendor in your vendor area, you won't sort of stick a little close to home, so you can still chat with people about what you're doing at your booth, right?
So you just need to take somebody else with you to man the booth while you take a break and go check out the rest of it.
Absolutely. I was kind of hoping that John's travels would line up with Vermont Overland Rally this year, so we both get to see the event. But that's plans change, and he still made it up, so that was awesome.
But maybe this year.
Yeah. And I still have to make it down to the Vintage Grand Prix too, so it goes both ways.
Indeed, so there are a number of events in the United States that are interesting to get to. So that is the news for December 2017 and the 57th edition of the Centresteer podcast. When we return from this short break, we will talk with Simon Jenner, who is the host of the second Land Rover focused podcast, the Green Oval podcast. Welcome back to the Centresteer podcast, show number 57. Earlier I said, for the last time, the only Land Rover podcast on the planet, because our new guest, special guest, Simon Jenner from Birmingham, England, now has the second Land Rover podcast on the planet. A very warm welcome to you, Simon.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's wonderful. So, Simon, second Land Rover podcast on the planet. How'd it happen? Where'd it come from? And welcome to the community too.
Yeah, I feel really guilty actually for raining on your parade here.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, somebody had to try to copy us someday.
Yeah, exactly. It was going to happen, wasn't it, at some point?
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, is it not?
Oh, exactly. It is. Totally. Yeah. And following in big footsteps, I'd say.
I'm a large person, yes.
Yeah, that's not what I meant.
John casts a large shadow.
Exactly, yeah. Deep footprints then. So, yeah, how did it come about? Yeah, it's a really good question. So nothing too thought through or planned, but been into Land Rovers for quite a while, had some discos, and now have a Defender 110, and been blogging about it, kind of mostly the repairs and so forth, and the trials and tribulations, and then just decided to try my hand at podcasting. And here we are, just about to launch episode 3, so very early days compared to yourselves.
Pretty much how we started. We didn't know much about it either, just started doing it.
Yeah, and here you are 5 years in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah, I know. Imagine that. Yeah.
There's no imagining. It's happened. It's happened. So you're located in Birmingham. You're not far from the Holy of Holies in Solihull.
Yeah, so about 15 minutes drive from the factory, and this is definitely Land Rover country. Like if you're doing the school run, you're going to be bumping into Range Rovers, Evoques, everything.
What do you drive, and how long have you been in the Land Rover community?
I was trying to think when I first had my first Land Rover. I mean, so my background's military, so I've been driving Land Rover since I was 18. Canvas, yeah, depends what you mean by good, but yeah, very
proper maybe is the better word.
Yeah, authentic, let's say, yeah.
There we go.
But I think I had my first Discovery, which is like what we would call a bits and pieces. So it was a bit of a Disco 1, a bit of a Disco 2. That was probably back in, I don't know, 2000 or something like that. And I've had Disco 3. And recently, or this year, I bought a Defender 110, which is like a 97 model. So relatively new in the grand scheme of things. But so I've had that about 9 months now.
Newer than we're allowed to have, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, by your standards, very new. But it's 20 years, so it's still getting on a bit. It's still falling to bits, like all good Land Rovers.
Just broken in.
Yeah, just broken, I think, is the answer.
Yeah, what's under?
It's a 300 TDI, so it's a standard. Excellent. 300 TDI. So good quality engine, but in all the usual places is it falling to bits. The doors, the chassis, etc.
That's just building character.
Yeah, exactly. It's just costing a fortune. That's what that's doing.
Is it your daily drive?
Yeah, it is actually. It's my daily drive. I don't drive far because I commute into the city on the train, so it probably does 2 miles a day or something like that.
Don't drive far because you can't.
Because it's not comfortable. Yeah, no, it's been pretty reliable actually. It's just when you're driving on a daily commute, you'd appreciate this, but if you're trying to work on it, everything is planned around. Can I get this back on the road by Monday?
Oh yeah.
So that makes the big jobs really tricky.
So what was the very first Land Rover you owned, and when?
So my first Land Rover was first purchased Land Rover was the bits and pieces Discovery. It was a Discovery 1 chassis, I think, with a 2 body, or a 2 chassis with a 1 body. I forget which way around it was. A sort of a 6-inch lift. It was a proper mud buster. Wow. So yeah, I had that for about 5 years, and that was a good bit of kit.
Yeah, 6 inches is not for the tame at heart. That's for sure.
No, yeah. it was a leg up to get in. So it was a real beast on the road, with snorkel and all the rest of it. So
you're probably in the drive shaft of the month club too.
Yeah, well, I went through a few of those.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, because as we all know here, they don't. I was driving down one of the motorways here in the UK and it fell off. So yeah, and came through the driver's footwell. As it went off, as it hit the ground and then bounced back up and put a big hole in the driver's footwell.
Well, you're lucky you didn't put a hole in the side of the transmission.
Yeah, exactly. I was very lucky. I was able to actually, it was because the rear came off, so I was able to continue on the journey just without the rear wheel drive. So that works. Yeah,
the normal failure mode especially on the D2s is the front drive shaft falls apart right at the transfer case, and then the flailing end punches a hole in the side of the transmission. Yeah, and that ruins your day. It ruins your bank account too. Yeah. No, so I was lucky on that front. So that lasted 5 or 6 years, and then I sold it. I bought a D3, which was much more comfortable, I would say. It had a nightmare with the suspension. I think they're renowned for it, the air suspension. You need to be a bit of an engineer to keep up with those, I think. Yeah. I mean, it just went back into the shop every time. I didn't bother with trying to do anything on that. It's just too complicated.
So, Simon, tell us about the podcast. You have 2 episodes under your belt. I've listened to both of them. They're very good. You seem to, it looks like you're going to talk to a different person every month. Is that the plan for the show, or do you have, what are the future plans for the show?
Yeah, so obviously still finding our feet, but the plan is that, my sort of angle is around expeditions, overlanding, repairing and building. So I'm going to be talking to somebody, each different person each show. I've got coming up on the next episode, I've got Tim, who's got a similar to yourself, who's got an XMOD 109 fitted for radio. So a chat to him. He's taken it over the last 3 or 4 years and been sort of adding bits to it and the usual sort of Land Rover thing. So I've had a good chat with him. And I've got a number of other people coming up over the next few months, similar conversations, but really interested to talk to people that are out there doing it, particularly the overlanding side, because that's the bit that interests me.
And how often do you plan to have the show come out? Is this going to be monthly, weekly? I know you're not doing daily.
Definitely not doing daily. Probably every 2 weeks, but we'll see. I think we're already at the 2 week point, and I haven't released episode 3 yet. So roughly 2 weeks, I think. And
that's ambitious, I've got to say.
Yeah, I'm already realizing that.
Yeah, we have a hard time just getting out once a month.
It's time consuming. That's the problem, isn't it? It's time consuming. So we'll see how that goes. That might change to monthly.
And where can folks get to the show? Of course, we will have a link in the show notes, but for those listening, and then you have a website, and what can they find on the website?
Yep. So if you go to greenovalpodcast.com, that's greenovalpodcast.com, then you can find it. You can also find it on iTunes and various other places around the internet. And you'll find on there, obviously, all the latest episodes, but we've also got a bit of a blog on things that we're up to with our Land Rovers.
Nice.
Yeah,
Very nice.
I did enjoy the search and rescue one, because that was your episode number 2, and that specifically highlighted what you're talking about: people using their trucks and how they're using them, and how the truck assists them with whatever their work is, or maybe they're overlanding,
doing important things.
I think he actually said that in the show, if I'm not mistaken. Didn't you say
that? As he should. We look for opportunities to say that every month.
Exactly, yeah. That's a Hammond quote, isn't it?
Oh, of course it is.
Yes. Yeah. At least you know that. There's many people who don't know that.
Yeah, he gets bonus points for knowing the reference.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Have you guys got the Grand Tour Series 2 back?
Yes.
It started.
Yes.
Yep. What's your thoughts? Because I get a lot of the US people didn't like the Series 1.
It was, there were some things about it that I didn't really enjoy. I agree, it was okay.
I think a lot of us are resistant to change, so it takes us a while to warm up to new things.
Actually, no, I disagree, Harold. I thought the season 1 was a lot like the original Top Gear, but Clarkson had his, the bullshit stuff in there. Was it the celebrity brain crash was kind of like an inside joke, I thought, that didn't go over well. The American was, supposed to be this like Stig replacement, which I think was also kind of like another joke that I don't think went over well.
Right.
And that's why I think he was trying to say, at least I thought, my take on it was, we're like Top Gear, but we're different, but we're going to make it different and try to get one over on you with some sort of inside joke. And I didn't think that played well. And they basically admitted to it. They got on there and said, we've killed the celebrity brain crash. It's no longer, you guys hated it, so it's not on the show now. And I think focusing on those guys and the adventure part, I think that's really the key to that show.
Yeah,
I think it always has been the key. You got to go with what they do best.
Yeah, Totally agree. I think Series 2 is much better. It's back. It feels much more back to where Top Gear was.
Right. Do you guys get that? No, it's a little off topic, but Grand Tour, is that on the BBC or ITV? Because we get it here with Amazon Prime. I don't know how that's just...
It's the same. It's on Amazon only.
Okay. I really enjoy Wheeler Dealers. I think that's, I know it's completely different than what we've talked about, but I think Wheeler Dealers is a really good show, and they've added Ant to the show. It seems to have reinvigorated that show. And
they've had a lot of Land Rover coverage on that over the years, too, which is nice.
Yes, yeah.
For us over here in the States.
Yeah, those of us who aren't infested with them, and every school running into too many of them. It's a specialty over here. It's not a commonplace.
Yeah, we're kind of spoiled.
Yeah, you are.
What else is planned for the show? Are you you're seemingly keeping it to about 30 minutes?
How How do you do that?
Yeah, I'm wondering how you guys talk for 2 hours, but now I see.
It's very easy, man. It's easy.
Yeah.
You ought to see the rough file before we cut it down.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm trying. I'm aiming for 20 to 30 minutes, which is kind of like the average commute run in the UK. So that kind of is nice for sitting on the train or the bus or wherever you're going or in the car. So it about fits nicely with that.
Yeah, well, we have much more open space here. I guess we need to fill 2 hours to cover the commute.
Yeah, that's true.
and we have Vasily, who's usually traveling on an airplane between jobs. Gives him something to listen to when he's traveling on the plane. Hi, Vasily. Just thought there we go. We'll shout it.
Yeah, we do it just for you, buddy.
Give us a preview of what you have planned for the next several weeks or months.
I'd love to if I had it that planned far ahead. But I think the main aim at the moment is that we're heading out in April, a bunch of us, to the Santana Trophy. So we're currently fitting out 2 of the my 110 and a friend's 110. So we're going to be catching up with him, Stuart, and just kind of finding out what he's done on his 110. So that's going to be a kind of running theme. And then hopefully once we get out to Africa, we're going to do some sort of live podcasting out in the field and see how that goes as well.
Very nice.
Yeah, that sounds like fun.
I'm glad you didn't turn that question around on us and ask what we had planned for the next month or so either.
We're still working on this month, in case you can't tell.
Yes, exactly. It's work in progress.
That's why we have editing capability.
Yeah, indeed.
The power of
Never
production.
quite know what we're going to get until it's out there.
Tell our listeners more about the Santana Trophy.
Yeah, so it's Santana is they basically had the Spanish license for Land Rover, and so they manufactured their own Land Rover under the brand Santana. So a bunch of guys from Spain have set up this trophy in the across the Sahara Desert, and it's a kind of a raid. They call it a raid, but it's kind of camel trophy, Paris-Dakar type event over 7 days. It goes across the Sahara Desert with a whole bunch of navigation stages and special stages, etc. So I mean, I think for us, just getting there will be the main battle, because we're going to drive from here, the UK, down to Morocco, and then compete in the rally and then drive back. So I think it should be just interesting just getting there and getting back.
Is your truck going to be part of the competition, or is it a support vehicle?
No, so my vehicle's too young, would you believe it, to be. So it's really the trophy's about series through to the 90 and the 110s. So up to 99 or something like that, 89, sorry, maybe early into 90s, before it changed to the Defender. So my vehicle's going as a support vehicle. Stuart's vehicle is a bit older, so his vehicle will be the competing one.
So the event is only open to vehicles which would be legal to import to the U.S.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
So you could put it back on a boat and bring it back over and do the trophy.
Yeah, because that doesn't cost much. We could do that.
Yeah, easy.
And is it limited to Santana vehicles, or only basically anyone that would have qualified for Santana licensing to reproduce it?
Exactly, yeah. So it's any series or Santana, or any Land Rover or Santana qualified, and maybe others, because there was other brands out there at the time, wasn't there?
Right.
Belgium had one, and so forth. So I guess it's anything, but I think it's mainly Land Rovers and Santanas.
Very nice.
Neat.
Simon, it sounds very much like the Rally des Gazelles, except for men.
Yeah, exactly. I think it is. It sounds very similar. Yeah, there's a number of them actually, and there's about 2 or 3 in Morocco that are similar, but it does sound like your Gazelle.
That's a spectacular event. I think you'll have a wonderful time.
Yeah, I think it'll be amazing. I think our biggest challenge is getting there, getting back in one piece. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, it's not the getting there; it's what you do to it while you're there that renders it impossible to drive home.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
yeah, we'll see what happens, what falls off.
Right, but it doesn't look like a challenging, technical kind of challenge. It's more just more of an overlanding challenge, right?
Yeah, I think it's got various stages. It's got some sand duning in there. It's quite a bit of off-road. So I think each day split between some on-road segment and off-road segment, but it's at least several hundred kilometres off-road each day. So that I guess alone will have some wear and tear on the vehicle. But I don't think it's not super technical.
Yeah, based on the pictures that they've seen, and they have their site, which we'll of course have a link in the show notes, has a Spanish, English, and French section, and the pictures, at least they show, look normal. Hard pack road. There's a lot of sand, but I'm not seeing anything super technical when it comes to being there as part of the challenge.
No, I think it'll be fine. I think obviously sand will be the biggest, obviously being the desert, will be probably our biggest issue. And I've been there before, not in a Land Rover, but just in a normal car. I did some stupid challenge a few years back, and we snapped stuff in a sand dune in the steering rack just because it couldn't deal with it. Hopefully the Land Rover will fare better.
And of course, take along some spare filters.
Yeah, filters, half shafts, all the usual stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you know how many trucks compete, and are they from all over Europe and Africa, or do they get folks from other areas?
Yeah, it's really diverse. It looks like it's all over Europe. It's about 30 competing vehicles, 30, 40 competing vehicles, and then a bunch of support vehicles. So I would guess there's going to be 100+ people on the rally itself.
That's impressive.
When is the rally again, Simon?
It is. It's a good question. We leave at the beginning of April.
Yeah, it looks like
we've got a week to get down there.
It's
a week of the
April
rally.
7th through the 13th.
There you go. Yeah. So we're leaving early April, and so I think we've got about 15 days or something like 16 days trip.
Right. Do you actually camp too? Is it a camping thing?
I think it's not. It's more what they call gîtes. There's a bed, basically.
What? What is it? I'm sorry. What's that?
They call them gîtes. It's like I wouldn't call them hotels. You might call them hostels or something like that.
Right.
But it's basic accommodation.
We call that a homeless shelter.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're not that bad.
Yeah, it looks like it's 7th through the 13th of April, 2018. And so you're going to you intend to podcast from the road. Is that the plan?
That's the plan, yeah. So we should be able to do that. Morocco's got pretty good coverage of internet and so forth when we get to some of the cities. So we should be able to maybe even publish something while we're over there.
I think you mentioned this, but I lost the thought. What your buddy is taking what truck again?
It's 200 TDI 110.
Okay.
So I think it's 87 or something like that.
Okay. Cool. Yeah.
So collectively, you're taking 220 inches of Land Rover greatness.
Yeah, exactly. We are, yeah. And hoping to come back with roughly the same amount.
Yes, yeah.
Nothing shorter would be good.
Under your own power, too.
Yeah, that would be good. Not on the back of a recovery truck.
Right, all 500 TDIs cranking.
Yeah, exactly. It's a long trip on the back of a recovery truck.
Yeah,
or on the back of a rope behind the other one.
Yeah, that's a very long pull.
So what else is planned for the podcast in the future beyond the camel trophy? Sorry, that's it in my head. Beyond the Santana trophy.
Wishful thinking, John.
Yeah, I know.
That would be great, wouldn't it? If they brought back that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Have to find a different sponsor, but yeah.
I mean, live in hope. I don't know. We've already started looking at what other trophies are out there. What other things can we do? There's a few here in the UK that they host each year, so we've started looking at some of those and see once we get back from that what's next on the list. Who knows? But my personal plan is that 2020 I'm going to drive from here to Cape Town in the 110. So that's probably a couple of months trip across Africa.
Are you going to West Coast or East Coast of Africa?
Probably West Coast, just because there's less war zones.
Yes, important safety
reason.
tip.
Yeah, very.
It's just it's really difficult plotting a route or even planning that far ahead because you just don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 years or so. What's going to break out, war, where, etc. So I suspect there'll be a lot of replanning as you get closer.
Yeah, probably good to have a plan B and a plan C.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it used to be that you'd always go east, Egypt and down that side, but now that looks dodgy.
Well, that used to be the English-speaking side of Africa, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, exactly true. Yeah, whereas the West very French.
Yeah, you should talk to the Bells. Of course, being African, they can clue you in, but they'd be a good guest for your show too.
Yeah, I'd love that. There's a whole bunch of sort of people, the Bells, Lizzie Buss. There's a whole sort of long list of people that have done this sort of thing. It would be great to get on board.
And veterans of our podcast, they know how it works.
Yeah, I just need to go down your show, your guest list, really, don't I?
Hit our website.
Can I charge you for that?
Yeah, exactly. The pre-finding fee.
That's right. Yes, exactly.
We'll license our guests to you.
Exactly.
Kind of inside podcast baseball, as we would use that word here, inside baseball. I'm always amazed at finding guests, and it seems to happen, and I put a little bit of effort into it, but the guests seem to pop up. So you are welcome, sir, to contact our guests, and if you need an invitation to guests, I'd be happy to do that for you.
As long as you don't steal any of the ones we haven't gotten yet. You poach our pending guests, and there will be words.
Try not to. Hopefully, I can return the favor and pass you some on that I come across here.
That'd be great.
All right.
Do you intend to talk to any actual Land Rover factory people since you are in Birmingham?
Yeah, certainly a possibility. And I know people that work for them. I think the challenge is going to be getting them on the record, as it were, to be able to say anything. Most of them won't get clearance to come on a podcast, but we'll see. I mean, certainly given it's on my doorstep, it would be crazy not to at least try.
Well, the precedent has been set. We've backdoored a couple of them, but it's like you say, getting them to admit to something is difficult sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I've already been on the sort of went on the tour pre-Defender close down, but they're doing new tours of obviously all the what do they call it? The classic car, the repairs piece and so forth. They're doing tours around.
Oh, they call it Land Rover Reborn.
So I'm hoping to get on one of those, and whether I'll be able to do any recording then, I don't know. We'll see. Probably not, but we can at least try.
Absolutely love to live vicariously through you for those. So by all means, do what you can.
Yeah, I'll record something and maybe you guys can use it.
Yeah, run that microphone wire down your sleeve and keep pointing your hand at different things.
That's right, yeah.
Sir, why do you have a big box at your hip? I don't understand why. Yeah. So it looks like there's a glint of light there. Something's reflecting. For listeners and also my guests and contributors to the show, Simon and I did talk previous to the podcast to kind of just talk podcaster to podcaster, and we did talk about some collaboration activities. Not sure what those are beyond using the word, but maybe these are some things that we could possibly help each other on our respective shows. So maybe you being in very close to the factory could be helpful to us also.
So yeah, maybe covering some UK shows and obviously you guys covering the US shows, we could swap.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I did invite you to the Pittsburgh Vintage Grand Prix, which is pretty cool. I always encourage people to come to it. It's a nice show.
And we would be glad to provide you with as much ignorant American input
and accommodation.
Yeah, well, that sounds really good. I'd love that, actually.
I won't go off on my my historical rant about the connections between Pittsburgh and Britain, so I'll let that go.
That is readily available on several back issues of our podcast.
Yes, I do have. It's beyond to say that behind me, all the guests can see because we have the Skype running with a video, but I do have my Britsburg flag flying, which is a Union Jack in black and gold, called the British American Connections Pittsburgh Club, or kind of a club, to highlight connections between Britain and Pittsburgh, because, Pittsburgh was named after William Pitt the Elder. Okay, so Simon, thank you very much for coming on the show, and I didn't edit that, by the way. It was just me immediately segueing into the end. Simon, thanks for coming on the show and talking about the podcast. Welcome to Land Rover Podcastdom. I can't think of any other word.
Thanks very much, and it's great to chat with you.
Just a reminder where folks can find your show and get it to the best of your knowledge, because it's funny. I actually find our show shows up on different weird podcatchers that I've never heard about before. Like there's one called Auto Radio, OTTO, and our show showed up there, and I got a notice from Google.
greenovalpodcast.com, iTunes, you can find it on, or TuneIn, and probably, as you say, other random places.
You'll start showing up in odd places, which is a good thing.
And I certainly,
me personally, or the podcast?
Okay, sure.
Interesting you say that, Simon, because I've now had two people that we've talked to on the show have now showed up at my house and been here. So we've had Bells came and stayed with me for 2 weeks as a result of talking to them on the show. Craig Dutton of My Land Rover Has a Soul, as I mentioned earlier in the program, visited my house and stayed for a night to take pictures for his upcoming book.
Now, John, I think maybe you should point out, just so we don't establish a precedent here, those people did not show up unannounced.
or uninvited.
Right. So if you are a listener out there and you'd like to show up at John's house, just give him a heads up first, okay?
Thanks, Harold. I do appreciate that. You're right. Simon, thanks very much. And seriously, in all sincerity, there's a little part of me that is sad that we are no longer the only Land Rover podcast on the planet, but I welcome you to the universe of podcastum and Land Rovers.
It's a big world. There's plenty of room for two.
Absolutely.
Wonderful, thanks.
Welcome to the world of podcasting. May God have mercy on your soul.
Yeah, and I'm really happy that you spelt it right, your podcast.
Sure. Yeah, well, that was on purpose.
It's an opportunity for us to explain things to people when we're trying to get them to find our show.
Yes, yeah.
And it was also a way to fly under the radar of Land Rover, so they didn't come after us for the name. I think at one point, Green Oval was on the list, short list of names.
I think it was on the short list.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was. I thought it was a little too close to home. I was worried they might complain about the Green Oval. Hopefully.
We'll see. Well, there's time for them to send me a letter.
Well, you're in the homeland, in the heart of the promised land. There, you might get away with more things than we would, but. Keep your friends in the headquarters.
Yeah, well, it's great to be on, guys. It was amazing to meet you.
And now let's spend a few minutes with Jeff Aronson. It's at the Jeff Aronson Corner. Jeff, we thank you for joining us on the show today. And why don't we get a little update on what you've been up to, mainly because since the last time you joined us on the show, you moved into the modern world, at least modern Land Rover world. You now own a Discovery One.
Amazement. I found a Discovery One in Maryland, and it turned out to be a terrific buy. It was also, unlike so many Discovery Ones, it was totally stock. So for better or for worse, it's whatever as it rolled off the assembly line in 1997. My thoughts on the vehicle are it is an extraordinary piece of engineering, both in terms of interior design and exterior dimension and capability. As you guys all know, the drivetrain is essentially that of the Defender and Range Rover Classic of that era. So it has every off-road capability. Mine, fortunately, does have the center diff lock hooked up, and the high-low range transfer case was, until just a couple of days ago, working very well. And it's an impressive off-road vehicle. I've had to use it for work a lot here on the island where I live. So it's been hauling everything from trailer loads of trees to large boats and carrying some equipment that I need. And it does so wonderfully. And when I do put people in it, unlike my series truck, nobody has to go change. Nobody has to... nobody sniffs and wonders what that smell is. It's quite something. I've taken long trips in it and been delighted with it as a road vehicle. I love its size. That 100-inch wheelbase is superb. The lack of overhead, you can really see the sides and back of the vehicle. You can see the front of the vehicle, its edges clearly. And it's narrow, which makes it perfect for squeezing into tight spaces in forest areas here in New England. My most recent experience with a Land Rover product, however, was just a couple of days ago when my Discovery One's transfer case failed. And it failed on the interstate highway heading from Portland, Maine, south of me to Connecticut. I heard noises that I knew I had not heard before, and I stepped out of the vehicle at a rest area in Kennebunk, Maine, and could hear some awful sounds as I drove slowly around a parking lot. When I called for a AAA truck because it was snowing, it brought it back to Land Rover Scarborough, Maine's one dealer, and asked if they had a moment to take a look at it. They squeezed it in, gave the transfer case its death sentence, and then very kindly when I explained that I was going down for work on the magazine down to Connecticut, said, "Oh, okay, take this Range Rover Evoque as a loaner." So I've spent 500 miles in a 2017 Evoque on the highway in snow, on normal highway driving conditions, and on snow around some windy Connecticut back roads. It wasn't just that I found it appealing, but the folks who I stayed with down there, who are not Land Rover owners, but certainly know of the magazine and my enthusiasm for them, were equally impressed with the vehicle. It was kind of interesting to watch non-Land Rover people who've really never been in anyone but mine really get off on a Land Rover product. It's an extraordinary.
And that is the point of the Evoque, is it not? To get non-Land Rover people into the brand?
Yes, it most certainly is. And it works. If you like driving a sort of a smaller, nimble type of vehicle, it has the electronic wizardry to make it feel nimble. The twin-turbo 2.0-liter four-cylinder, I have the gas one. There's nothing short of extraordinary when you need to get out on the highway very quickly. It certainly is. I thought my Discovery was fast because compared to my series truck, it is. But this
everything is fast compared to
bicycles are faster.
But this one is extraordinary, and so I commend Land Rover what they've done in making this car. So I had 4.5 hours drive each way, and a very busy weekend running around in it, and was pretty tired when I left Connecticut to drive back here to Maine. And the car did not fatigue me at all.
No,
Brilliant.
It wouldn't. How is the QE2, right?
It's the QE1. The
QE1.
QE2 name is for the great ship alone. I would never, as far as I'm concerned, it's been retired to the Great Name Hall of Fame.
Understood.
The QE2. So I will not touch that. It is the QE1. The QE1 has a new rebuilt transmission, a Rovers North rebuilt transmission in it, because it lost third and fourth gear. So it is thrumming around the island very nicely.
Oh, good.
Do you need third or fourth on Vinyl Haven, Jeff?
I don't need it for speed, but I did need it so that I don't crunch out the rest of the gearbox, right? I believe
that's true.
Yeah.
There would be shrapnel floating around taking out the rest of the gears.
Right. But I'm very happy with the way everything went. And she's fine. But I have to say, I wanted to comment on this. I went to the Range Rover Velar global launch in Palm Springs a couple of months back. And I stepped out of the flight from California, where they held it, back to Maine, and stepped out from a day's driving of a Velar into my Discovery One. Now, there's only a 20-year difference, if you will, in the vehicle's ages. But I stepped into that vehicle, and I felt as though perhaps something was wrong with the steering. Had all the tires been deflated because everything's so heavy? And why am I feeling every bump on the road? And I realized it's an extraordinary bit of engineering that allows a vehicle to change so dramatically in such a relatively short period of time. You know, if somebody driving a 1950s American car and driving a 1970s American car, they felt the same. They were faster and they might have had better brakes and so on by the time the 70s rolled around, but in dimension, they felt the same in road feel. Look at what Land Rover has accomplished. I really, again, I'm in awe. I'm in awe. It may not be everything I've ever asked for in a vehicle, but I can't deny its capabilities have grown. And it's interestingly, I spoke with a Land Rover executive when I returned from that very trip. This person had been on the same global launch. He has a Range Rover Classic as his vehicle of choice when he is home. That's the one he keeps at home. That's the one he runs around in. He laughed and said that he had the same reaction from the Velar launch, getting back into his 91 Range Rover Classic.
It's a good point, Jeff, that we need to remember that, Land Rover continues to exist. I think there was a really good chance, and we've seen that information come out lately that Land Rover could have gone away and completely disappeared, and they have made great strides in making better vehicles, more reliable vehicles, and probably more capable vehicles over the time. So we shouldn't lose that. That's an excellent point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Right. Now, that being said, if somebody, if I won an Evoque in a contest, if somebody gave me an Evoque, I'd be happy to own it. But it is not what I would call an enthusiast vehicle, no more than the current Range Rover or the Velar are enthusiast vehicles. Right. And it would be harder for me to make the case even about the new Discovery. I just am not convinced that the things that we loved, that involvement with your vehicle, that is so much a part of the series Defender, Range Rover Classic, early Disco experience, is something that any vehicle actually gives you anymore, short of sports cars. And even they have changed the way that they produce the dynamic with the driver.
Here's the question for you, Jeff. We've talked about capability and of the new stuff, but would you choose the new Velar if you had to replace your fleet? Would you choose the Velar for doing the kinds of important work that you do on Vinyl Haven?
Oh my gosh, no, not in the slightest.
Okay, then.
Yeah, but I'm not certain. Thank you for important. It's important to me. I'm not certain it's important in the larger world. But
it's important to the citizens of Vinyl Haven, is it not?
Thank you. The issue is that the Velar will always get me somewhere, and it would get me somewhere off-road, as I learned as well, if I had to do something off-road. It will get me there. Whether I want a vehicle whose engineering excellence is retracting door handles, or would I like that vehicle to come as a more stripped-down model available to me? I can open a door handle. It doesn't need to come out to me. I don't need a stop-start, if you will. I don't need a $200 key fob. But I recognize that there just isn't much of a market to produce a vehicle because me anyway, I don't really demand what the broad market demands. And manufacturing efficiencies really say we need to make a platform kind of vehicle that we can modify in several different ways. We can't do a hand-built vehicle any longer.
I think we're all in the same boat there in terms of what we actually need or want. And I think that is one of the things that, with all of the new vehicles, like you said, most of the vehicles are interchangeable at this point. You really have to build that love for the brand in different ways. Maybe that's through the design process, because what we sort of have is that love that's been built through blood, sweat, and tears with our vehicles, that we say, no, this vehicle does great things for me. I've had to do a lot for it. I'm going to keep it going. With the new vehicles, it's not necessary. And so one of the differences is with a newer vehicle and specialty equipment required for repair and maintenance on that vehicle, we'll be less able to. What you'll really need is a healthy checkbook as opposed to a healthy work ethic of working on your own vehicle. We just can't do much of that anymore. Yeah, and that's really true for all the vehicles at this point.
Yes. Yeah.
What's coming up in the future months with the magazine, with Rovers Magazine?
Well, with Rovers Magazine, thank you. I think we're going to entertain readers starting with our winter issue 2018. We have a real freshening of the magazine that's going on. And I think you'll see I know you'll see some interesting new looks to it. I just came back from meetings at Rovers North where we talked about changes that we wanted to see to further enhance its offerings and make it ever more valuable and entertaining to enthusiasts. So I'm very excited about what's happening. It's certainly causing me a lot of extra work, but my goodness, what fun it is to dive in like that and to see these changes unfold.
So in other words, it's going to be different, but it's going to be appealing, and we will like it.
I see where he's going.
Yes,
I think I see where he's going.
Very well put, very carefully said. Sure. and it reflects everything. There's so much more that we want to cover that actually I can say we've been given some extra space for more articles.
Cool. Oh, excellent.
Wonderful relationship that we have magazine to Rovers North. It's been terrific to us.
That's good to hear.
It really is a great resource.
Thank you. It's great fun to do. It is an opportunity for me to live in a very small place, but to have connections around the world with such a fabulous community of enthusiasts. Really, it's a great opportunity. One I don't take lightly or forget about.
You do really do a good job, Jeff.
That's very nice. Thank you.
It's very similar to the podcast. We make connections around the world and for the community and help the community.
And you certainly do. People enjoy it. Great deal.
Thank you. When will the winter issue drop in our mailboxes?
It will drop in the middle of February.
Oh, wonderful. Good deal. We look forward to that. And
just in time for the winter romp, eh?
The printer schedule, it's just after winter romp. Can't get a story. Winter romp we'll have to pay attention to that while I'm there, but it won't be in until the spring issue, I'm sure. It just doesn't work.
Can you give us one thing that we anticipate that you haven't already told us about the new? I guess the new Rovers magazine, just like the new Defender, right?
Well, I can say that we're going to have a new feature that I hope will become a regular feature in every issue. I don't want to divulge it, but I believe that it will be highly entertaining in the best sense of the word to enthusiasts, but will also allow enthusiasts to participate even more deeply in the magazine.
Oh, very nice. Is sightings going away?
Oh, gosh. If I took sightings away, I'd be fired instantly or on and quartered.
Fair enough.
And where would John get his mugs? So
I have stopped.
Yeah.
I had 7, and I stopped. I do not put any more new sightings.
You ran out of kitchen space for all your mugs, John.
I did. I could put one in. You're probably going to get a ton of sighting requests from The Crown, which is on Netflix, season 2.
May I?
Oh, go ahead.
Excuse me while I draw out the rules of sightings on British programs.
It's not really a British program. It's a Netflix program. It's not. It's true. It's not. It's available and it's not done by a British producer. I don't think.
Are you a lawyer?
It's on Netflix, and the Queen, played by Claire Foy, actually drives a Series 1 several times. She's driving it, and there's 2 Series 1s in it at one point. One, she's helping to pull a log off of a trail. It's very exciting.
The Queen doing important things. I like it.
May I cite rule number 2?
Okay,
if your sighting doesn't really surprise you, it won't surprise us either.
Oh, okay.
Thus, we can't award you a 1.
All right.
We're delighted, but not surprised that Land Rovers appear in British programs, publications, films with British themes, and media.
I'm just telling you, you probably already have a lot of notifications from that one, I would suspect.
Yes.
So be prepared to invoke Rule 2 a lot.
Believe me, Rule 2 gets invoked a lot.
Well, maybe thanks to the podcast, we can head off some of that by letting folks know that Jeff already knows. You don't need to report.
He is on to us.
I want people to send it in. It makes it look like I have a lot of emails. So I think I want to tell people, look how many emails I have. All these are friends. Most of them are sightings.
For those who, if you haven't already subscribed to Rovers Magazine, you can do so, and there's a feature in there called Sightings, and sounds exactly what it sounds like. If you see a Land Rover in some unique situation, not a British TV show or themed TV show, you can let Jeff know, and you may win a coveted Rover Magazine mug.
And you heard it here. Go ahead and submit all the bogus sightings you want because Jeff says he wants the appearance of having friends.
Spam them. Just go ahead and
Thank you for reiterating that.
Anytime.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Jeff, I know, but let's make sure we're clear on this for folks who maybe haven't already subscribed to the magazine. You can go to roversmagazine.com. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And there's a menu tab right at the top to receive a copy. and hopefully we can continue to send you copies. It's a service of Rovers North, and for active customers of Rovers North, the magazine will always come.
If you are not in the U.S. or North America, is it available by post, or can you only get it in the PDF form?
Only in the PDF form. It is available online. We archive past copies. You can always download it in PDF to your device. And
so concludes the Jeff Aronson corner of the podcast. I think maybe it's a new segment on the show. We'll have you back periodically, and we have the Jeff Aronson corner. Jeff Aronson, we'll call it Celebrity Brain Crash. Maybe not. Maybe not.
Well,
maybe not.
Before we
I got
fully
the brain
conclude
crash part down.
Before we fully conclude this segment, I would like to know what Jeff is looking forward to in the Land Rover world for next year, considering we are so close to the end of 2017 right now.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to the new Defender when it comes out. I am looking forward to the Maine Winter Romp, which is really one of the largest winter events on the East Coast. This will be the President's Day weekend in February. I also want to highlight that enthusiast Marshall Grant of Blue Ridge Expeditions will be doing his winter safari in Virginia, Western Virginia, at the end of January. I'm quite excited about that. There are terrific events that are held. The South Central Texas, the SCAR event is always a terrific one.
I agree.
In April, the Sand Rover Rally down in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. A chance for Gulf Coast enthusiasts to meet up and enjoy. There is also the Carolina Club's Uhari Safari event, which is also in April and held outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, in a national forest there. Always a good time. All of those are wonderful opportunities for people to get together. And I would love to go out to California to one of the NorCal or SoCal events. Both clubs do some wonderful activities outside of the major cities in those two regions. I'm hoping I can get there this year.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for coming on the show and for all you do for the Land Rover community. It is appreciated. You were actually one of the inspirations for the podcast. You may not know that, having that conversation, online, translated in some part to the podcast. So I personally thank you for what you've done and helping out the community.
Well, I appreciate that. You're welcome. But thank you to all of you who contribute to this podcast. I have taken them with me on flights, and it's a wonderful way to pass the time. It's just terrific that you're all contributing so much to the understanding and enjoyment, and both technically as well as emotionally, for the Land Rover marque. So congratulations to each of you.
We are coming up.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we are rapidly coming up on 5 years. Show number 60 will be our 5th year, and maybe we should include you. I hadn't thought too much about it yet, but I think, Jeff, we need to include you in that somehow.
Actually, John, given the background work that we did prior to our first podcast, we really already have been in it 5 years now.
Thanks again, Jeff. We will talk to you.
Very welcome. Merry Christmas, everybody, too.
And Merry Christmas
to
you.
New Year. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
And that's the Centresteer podcast for December 2017. I want to thank all our contributors today. Thanks to Harold. Thanks to Morgan. They all via Skype. Harold hopefully will return to
civilization
soon. You're in the, what did you call it, the high desert, of California?
Well, it's kind of like desert, but yeah, I'm in the high country here in the foothills of the Sierras.
And you literally are outside with a hand crank to keep electricity going, right?
Yeah, you drop a nickel and turn the crank, and yeah, kind of primitive here. The water supply comes and goes because I keep running a trencher through the pipe and snapping them off. So yeah, it's been an interesting couple weeks.
Has it been a couple weeks already? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. It feels like a year, but yes, a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Morgan, for joining us again. You are the purveyor of SeriesParts.com.
Yes, I am, and I hope looking at the new year, I hope to refresh that a little bit. It's feeling a little dogged at this point.
Is that what everybody's doing now? Refreshing everything? We're getting a new Rovers magazine. We're getting a new seriesparts.com.
Yeah, and in other news, in terms of things I'm looking forward to, I am finally down to just 2 vehicles, one running, and, well, although it's been in the shop frequently, and my Series 3 restoration project. So I'm really hopeful to get back to seriesparts.com and my restoration.
So you have one running vehicle and one Rover.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So you sold the Volvo?
I have sold the Volvo. I have sold the Disco 2. I am down to just the
Wow.
Pathfinder and the Series 3. Yeah, it's an interesting feeling, but looking forward to all the new year, and many thanks to everybody who I've seen this year at the various events, and looking forward to those for the new year as well. Many thanks all around to everybody, you guys here on the podcast, and all of our listeners.
Thanks to Jeff Aronson of Rovers Magazine for joining us. And, of course, a warm welcome and thanks to Simon Jenner of the Green Oval Podcast. Please do go check that out. There is no rivalry here. It's good to have another podcast on the planet. I'll come up with something on what we're going to call ourselves now. I know with the first Land Rover podcast on the planet.
The original Land Rover podcast.
Maybe?
Yeah, prototype Land Rover on the
No, it's not a prototype. It's been in production for a while now. I still like
first
original.
production podcast. I like original.
The original, the authentic, the real deal.
Speaking of the real deal, thanks to Pax, the one true Pax, for his production support and continued help. Don't forget, through the end of the year, Alloy and Grit and Deemer Box have discounts for our listeners. You can get $10 off any subscription to Alloy and Grit, either 1 year or 2 years. You can get $50 off a Deemer box, and I'd like to reiterate that we didn't receive anything from those guys for having them on the show and getting those discounts, except I did get a nice discount on the Deemer box.
So that's something, but it's, aside from that.
Well, they didn't pay us any money.
And John's discount wasn't any better than any of our listeners can get.
Well, that's not true. No, it was a better discount than the listeners could get.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
all right, but all right.
But fair enough.
Never mind.
Yeah, no, that's okay. No, I would like to be clear and upfront. And same thing with, I didn't get anything from having, we had Veronica from the Landy Books on the show. I ordered 5 of those, and it all goes to help her. I do know the podcast did get them 3 new subscriptions for Alloy and Grit.
Perfect.
I hope you enjoyed show number 57. Thank you for listening. We're coming up on show number 60 and our 5th year. So I think it's high time we have a survey of our listeners. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do yet, but we will tweet out and post our survey link here within the next few weeks. Reminder to visit our website for past show and show notes. You can connect with us also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can also directly support the show at patreon.com/Centresteer. We'd love to hear from you and what you're doing in your Land Rover. Until the next show, I ask you to share it with one other Land Rover fan. Thanks for listening. Wave as we pass by.
And we will see you in the new year.
We're all lit up in blue.